So with that, now I'd like to welcome folks from my alma mater, Medill at Northwestern University, to talk about a conversation about a really interesting student and professional partnership that the school runs. So I'll hand it over to Tim Franklin.
Great, thank you. Thanks very much for that introduction. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, my name is Tim Franklin. I'm the Senior Associate Dean and the Local News Chair at Medill. I also run the Medill Local News Initiative and the Metro Media Lab project, which we're here to talk about today. It's great to be with you, and it's great to see so many old friends in person. Isn't it great to see everybody in person again? Fantastic. We want to talk about the potential of student collaborations with professional journalists and with professional news organizations, and specifically a program that we have at Medill that is really all about collaboration. So with the help of a grant 2 years ago from the Robert R. McCormick Foundation, Medill launched a project that we call the Metro Media Lab. And the lab is all about collaborating to strengthen local news and journalism education in Chicago. We're working directly with cohorts of Chicago news organizations on consumer research, on audience engagement, experimentation for new tools, and financial strategies to bolster long-term sustainability. We're also working with high school journalism educators in Chicago to grow new media programs in schools and provide training for teachers and students. It's a program we call Teach for Chicago Journalism. And we're connecting Medill with Chicago high schools to try to inspire folks to careers in journalism. And part of the Metro Media Lab, which we're going to talk about now, also includes collaborations that connect Medill students with professional journalists on enterprise stories on major topics like drug policy, mental health, and housing. These in-depth, solutions-oriented stories provide valuable reporting experiences for our students, which we care a lot about, but they also give news outlets stories that they might not have bandwidth to do otherwise. And Chicagoans ultimately benefit from this work because we're shedding light on important issues. I'm going to shut up and turn it over to our moderator, and here to lead the discussion is my Medill faculty colleague, Carrie Leitersen, who heads up our Social Justice News Nexus Fellowship program. Before joining Medill about 9 years ago, Carrie was a staff writer in the Midwest Bureau of the Washington Post. She later became a reporter for the Chicago edition of the New York Times through the Chicago News Collaborative. And in addition to her teaching at Medill, and I don't know how she has time to do this, Carrie also covers energy for the Midwest Energy News and writes freelance still for the Washington Post, for People Magazine, for the PGA, and Discover Magazine, and others. And on a side note, I would just say that Carrie's probably the most physically fit person in this room. She's a former national champion marathon swimmer, and she still competes in marathons and triathlons. So I would not challenge her for money in a run or a swim. So please join me in welcoming Carrie Leitersen.
And I didn't put that in my bio for Tim to read that last part, but I guess he dug it up. So yeah, I mean, I've just felt really lucky being at Medill to work with these collaborations with students in the MSJ program and with some of the amazing local journalists and local outlets here. We got to start these collaborations about 8 years ago with support from the McCormick Foundation, and then have been able to continue and build it with the Solving for Chicago Collaborative and the Metro Media Lab. And so, yeah, let me just introduce our panelists who've been part of some of the collaborations that we've done, and they're going to talk a little bit about those collaborations. And then if there's time, I have some questions for them too, or if anyone has questions. So Josh McGhee, we worked with originally at the Chicago Reporter. We've gotten to work with him a couple of times with students, and he's a reporter for Injustice Watch, covering the courts, policing, prosecution, with an emphasis on data and public records. And he's also worked for WBON and DNA Info, and as I mentioned, the Chicago Reporter. And Courtney Kueppers was one of our MSJ students in the social justice investigative specialization a few years ago, who I got to work with on the collaboration with Southside Weekly, and she's now a digital reporter and producer at WBEZ and has worked with WBEZ for a while, even before taking on that job, and has been published in the Chicago Tribune and the Chicago Reader and other outlets. And then Apps Mandar Bichu is a current graduate student in the MSJ program to graduate this summer in the social justice specialization. And she is doing one of these collaborations currently with Illinois Latino News with Hugo Balta. So she'll talk a little bit about that. And Apps has done a great job covering education and other topics during her time in the program, and actually was on a student reporting trip to New Orleans where she did an awesome story about the education system for Native American residents in Louisiana. And then Hugo Balta, we've been really lucky to work with for the first time this year on one of these collaborations. He has 30 years of experience as a digital and broadcast media news executive with outlets like PBS, NBC, ABC, CBS, Telemundo, and ESPN. And he's the owner and publisher of Illinois, or actually of Latino News Network, and with Illinois Latino News, and twice the president of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, and also founded a not-for-profit organization in honor of his maternal grandmother that provides scholarships for students studying journalism. Thanks you all for being here. And maybe I can ask Josh first just to talk a little bit about the collaboration that we did. It's been 3 years since this collaboration, but it was a really successful, fun one. So I asked him to dig into his memory and talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so this was a project that kind of built on some of the beat reporting I was doing. I started with a pivot table of open data from the state's attorney's office. And basically, we looked at hate crimes, and we saw that the most likely defended were young African-American men, and that didn't kind of fit with our narrative of what we thought hate crimes were. And from there, I kind of did some reporting, keeping it local. But we got this idea, when there was a news found at the University of Illinois, and it got me thinking about my time when I was a student. I went to a school that wasn't that diverse. So it got me thinking about how students kind of reacted to these incidents and how they dealt with them. So basically, we were told about the class and they were looking for an opportunity. We had the idea to basically look at every single college in Illinois. This was a large project that I had never done something quite this big. And the Chicago Reporter only had 1 or 2 reporters. Luckily, Olivia was there to organize everything for us, because otherwise this would not have been possible. But basically, we had the students come in. We wrote FOIAs for things like the incidents, how the schools reacted to the incidents, and their training around it. Basically, we took those. I had the students send FOIAs. I helped them write the FOIAs. The biggest thing about FOIA is actually getting your FOIA back. So we had a lot of fun making the phone calls, finding out who the FOIA officer was, stalking them via the emails, and we got lots of things back. And we used those to figure out what kind of focal points we should be looking at and places we should be looking at. Students, they were really excited to have FOIAs and public records to kind of look at. And they really wanted to kind of dive into what was happening. So a lot of them made calls, did interviews, and provided a lot of background so that we could look at the whole state of Illinois, which is very big. I think probably the best thing about having students kind of taking a project like this is they have a whole different experience than me, and they're very diverse. So they had all these other kind of ideas of what is a hate crime or what we should be looking at. And they brought that to the table. And I don't think you can really get that in a newsroom. You probably don't even have that much diversity. I think that was really what made this interesting, was we got to look at a very vast school, a very vast state. And even Grace was in the class. She was at the University of Illinois when the incident happened. So we had the extra layer of a student who was actually there. So that was really good.
And we had, I think, 7 or 8 students on that team that Josh was leading. So that was a really big investigation. And he had compiled all the colleges in Illinois. I think it's like 300 or something schools total or more that we were looking at. So that was a pretty interesting effort. A great story.
Big one, yeah.
And then Courtney had a pretty different type of collaboration to talk about.
Yeah, really different. Josh's was so data heavy. In the series that I did, I worked with a team of Medill students last spring, and we did a series for Southside Weekly, a nonprofit newspaper here in Chicago, looking at secondary public health issues in neighborhoods that had been disproportionately affected by the pandemic. And this is spring 2021, and vaccines had rolled out, and we were all certain, if you can remember, we were going to have this COVID-free summer. And the city was really like, the tone from the city was that they were looking beyond the pandemic. But in these neighborhoods that had been disproportionately affected, it had also laid bare these pre-existing things that had been there before the pandemic, and the pandemic exacerbated, and now the city was moving on, and they felt like they were really going to be left behind. And not only were they behind pre-pandemic, but worse. And so what we did was we looked at green space access in Little Village, healthcare access in Englewood, and food access in South Shore. And Southside Weekly, for people who live in Chicago will know, they did amazing data reporting throughout the pandemic. They built this tool that when vaccines were rolling out, they built this tool that showed where people were dying from COVID and then where people in Chicago were getting vaccinated. And it just showed that the overlap was not there, and really highlighted shortfalls in the city's rollout of the vaccine. But they felt like they had not had, they're such a community-oriented newspaper, and they felt like they had not had the opportunity as much to go out and talk to people. And so the goal of this collaboration was really to go out and tell really community-focused stories and talk with a lot of folks. So that's what we did. They were pretty light on data, of course, incorporating the COVID data and that Southside Weekly had built with these really impressive tools, but really they were about going out and talking with people. So
Thank you. And that project actually won a Lissiger recently this year. Congratulations to Courtney and the team. Yeah, and then so Apps and Hugo are working on a collaboration right now. So maybe Apps, you can talk about your story first, and then Hugo can talk about sort of how that fits in with Illinois Latino News and the work he's doing.
Sounds good. So I'm currently, as part of Medill's Social Justice News Partnership, working with the Chicago Reporter and Illinois Latino News to investigate the enrollment gap that was caused in Latino Hispanic populations because of the pandemic. And it's very interesting because I've never worked on a solutions journalism article before that. So my first assignment was to write an outline of the story. So I went with the typical like who, what, when approach of journalism, and I wrote the issue and kind of like tacked on the solutions at the end of the outline. And Hugo was really helpful in helping me remember the 4 pillars of solutions journalism, which is to focus on the response of the issue, which was the enrollment gap, and then what evidence has been seen and what solutions have been implemented, and so on and so forth. And so that was something that I kept in mind when I was interviewing scholarly experts or colleges and students and asking them about what were the issues that were caused by the pandemic that caused that cohort. And I think it's really helpful because you can talk to all the experts that you want and you can talk to all the professors, but it has been really enlightening to talk to the students themselves and find out their experience. And this partnerships has been great because I think it has given me the independence to like navigate the project on my own, but at the same time, there has been consistent communication with Hugo, so I could also learn from his wisdom and expertise. So it's been really great.
She said it all, right? I mean, ditto. It's been a wonderful experience, as you could tell. It's wonderful to work with Apps and certainly work with Medill. And really collaboration is key to success. For us at Illinois Latino News, which we're new to this market, we're one of 5 independent news outlets born in New England, where I'm from. I moved to Chicago 2 years ago, and part of the 4 pillars of our foundation is solutions journalism. And that's really kind of resetting the mindset on storytelling as a journalist, because overwhelmingly studies show that the focus is on the problem. And if you spend any time, regardless of the platform, listening, watching, reading news, it's overwhelmingly providing a service, right? You need to provide light, shed light to those issues. But if that's all you're spending time on, well, that's half the story. So solutions journalism proposes, let's start with what's being done about the problem as we're talking about the problem. And in doing so, you're providing transparency in the process of storytelling. You're building trust with the public that, especially in the last 4 years and in previous administration, that trust has been marked by a lot of misinformation. So in working with apps, it's really about drawing from the wealth of experience that she already has, that she's gotten from Medill, and then applying it to other ways of storytelling so that we're talking about engagement in a way that is more bottom up, right? We're listening to what the public is looking for, as opposed to what often is a top-down approach in media. We're the journalists, we're more educated than you, we're gonna dictate, we're gonna set the table of what you need to know.
Great, thank you all. If anyone has questions, feel free to raise your hands. I have some questions for all of them. I guess, and you've sort of addressed this, but I don't know if there's anything else you'd add about what are really the keys to a successful collaboration between students and professional journalists, even logistical things that might be helpful, or deeper philosophical things, or anything you'd want to highlight.
I mean, with any big project, that's like the most important thing is going to be organization. If you have the right tool, Airtable is usually what we use, but like keeping it organized and keeping all the communication together in kind of the same spot, especially having whatever instructions the students are going to need handy and in a Google Drive where they can easily access, because you don't know when they're going to be working or when they have time. So kind of giving them the directions and things that they should be focused on in a drive where they can easily access at any time, so they can do the work when they have the time.
And that was a great learning experience. It was the first time we had used Airtable working with them, and just the level of organization that Josh and his team had to keep like 8 or 10 people going and organized and remembering what they were supposed to do. So that was really awesome and a great way that we learned from you guys.
Yeah, one thing I think I had worked before going back to grad school and being back in sort of the school environment, the thing that I liked is Medill that has a quarter system. So these partnerships are pretty quick. They're 10 weeks. And it was, it felt like every quarter you had this 10 weeks to do a story, whether it was in this partnership or in another capacity. But I think having that deadline on these is actually really helpful and something that you can use in your newsrooms as well. We had weekly check-ins and you had to have progress week over week, and we were working towards this thing. And you're trying to do something ambitious, but it's not so huge that it languishes for 6 months or something like that. So I think the tempo of it is actually nice that it fits within this class framework.
How about you, Mary?
I mean, I think as a student, it can be kind of intimidating when you're working in a professional setting. So what I like to do is like create a Google Doc. And so while I'm like writing, it's very helpful to kind of have you go through the document and then post comments and like get like those questions to kind of ponder about the project more. And then like Courtney said, I think the weekly check-ins also are super helpful when it comes to these partnerships.
The Google Docs helps us maximize time and focus the time that we do have together, because all of us could use a little more time. So it's really important for us to be ready to hit the ground running when we have these weekly meetings. I would add it's a relationship, and I emphasize respect. Too often, students are put in a position of intimidation and almost as if you should be lucky to be working in this newsroom, when they have a lot to offer the newsrooms that are too often run by people that are disconnected to the public that they're serving. So it's for me as a newsroom leader, it's really like I've said, and one of the first things that I told her was, you're in the driver's seat. My job is to help guide you. But what I want is to draw from what is of interest to you, how you are looking at the world and specifically the assignment, because we're separated by a good maybe 30 years. And that I want to tap into that as much as she wants to tap into my experience. So it's a two-way street relationship. For the students, know your self-worth. You have a lot to offer. For the newsroom leaders, be respectful of the resource that you're getting and respectful of that partnership. And that's going to be key to success.
Thank you. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So on that topic, I'm wondering whether when you bring students into a professional newsroom, whether there's some training that you have to do with these newsroom leaders to get them to kind of shift their viewpoint and really get to listen and accept the different perspectives that the students are bringing into the story, rather than it could be, 10 years ago, 15 years, it could be, okay, I'm your mentor and you're my little trainee and I'm going to teach you how to do journalism. So how do we, change that perspective?
Yeah, how do you set up to be successful? Right now we're in a strange time. A lot of newsrooms are still in a hybrid situation, if not remote. For us, we're remote. But to answer your question, and using a different example, we have a student that we're going to be working with from Mizzou, and I had to go through an orientation, and I thought it was wonderful because the students were going through their orientation, the newsroom leaders were going through one as well. And we were defining what success looks like. Some things were very basic, right? Introduce the student to the newsroom so that it's one day that they're there and then the next day they're not, right? So there's a lot that you need to think about in regards to even just basic things like introduction. And then the other ones is to really say, maximize, we've got 3 months with the student. Let's start defining what that flight plan looks like and tent poles along the way that we're going to be measuring success. And I think without that organization, you're doomed to fail because time goes by too quickly. So I think just what I've seen, especially in legacy media, there's a structure in how you're bringing in new employees, right? You go through orientation, you go through, this is how, what our expectations are. That's saying, draw from that well in defining what success looks like for the time that you have the student so that it's clear to all, and then you use that as a guide with the time that you have with them.
Yeah, it's a good question. And for these partnerships, the partners we've worked with, one of the things that's so great about being based in Chicago is just all the really wonderful, the whole ecosystem of, all the publications and organizations that are here today and a lot more. So we really, I think, we built these partnerships, with journalists that we'd worked with before and just tapping like all the rich networks of connections with Medill graduates and faculty. So, we really knew that we could trust our partners to really have a great, collaborative, good relationship with the students where they really appreciated the students being there. And but one thing that I do like about these partnerships is it's not just dropping a student in a newsroom. It is a very direct collaboration with one or two people at that newsroom. So I think that actually does a lot to avoid like a student just being lost in the mix or, dropped into a situation that they don't get, or that the newsroom doesn't get the training or guidance of how to work with the student. Like when you're really connecting directly with an editor or a reporter or both in one newsroom and doing something collaboratively, not like them giving the student orders, but literally collaborating on pieces. That's about this particular program is one thing I think works really well. Yeah, feel free to raise your hand if anyone else has questions. Yeah, on the collaboration fronts, obviously collaboration is just, the whole point of the summit and so much more common and necessary these days. And that I still hear from students now and then who are, worried about someone stealing their idea or, pitching an idea and it getting stolen and competition. And obviously that is still a thing, but I think it is just really great to be teaching students in this atmosphere where collaboration between different outlets is the norm. And I know everyone here has done, or at least the two journalists who've been working longer have done collaborations with other outlets in their professional roles. So I don't know if any of you could talk about, what makes those inter-organization or inter-outlet collaborations successful and, maybe how students can tap into those as well.
Yeah, I think the collaborations, they work best when the communication is there. When we were doing ours, we talked a lot beforehand about what the students wanted to get out of it. So it wasn't just send 300 FOIAs, which I would love to help sending 300 FOIAs. But especially with the timeline, it made it, okay, well, we got to send the FOIAs so that we get the records back. so that the students can actually think about the story and where they would go with this. I think that because of that kind of process, it allowed them to think specifically about how they could take a story away that wasn't going to be in this project. I think it gives you a lot of ideas of storytelling itself, but just kind of letting them have the space to think about what they're seeing and where they should go with it. I think that a lot of people brought different things, and that made it kind of better, and it gave them something to take away that wasn't just giving something to the Chicago Reporter. So I feel like one of the big things is definitely that communication beforehand. What are we doing? What are we trying to accomplish? Josh wants to look at hate crimes, specifically how it's going to affect the Black and Brown students at these schools. There's a lot of other hate crimes. There's a lot of other things that students found and saw that they could go, oh, I want to explore this deeper. I want to think about this in another arena. So I think that was something we started with at the front end. Like, these are the things that Josh is looking for. What do you guys see? What do you guys want to take away? What do you want to explore? And that was their choice. That was their choice to kind of dive in and think and dig that way. So I think that gives it so that everyone's getting something out of the experience.
And Courtney, I know WBEZ obviously does a ton of collaborations. I don't know if you've been directly involved with some of those, but I don't know if you have any thoughts on what makes those successful.
Yeah, and we at WBEZ are wading our way through a big new collaboration with this sometimes every day. So that's a work in progress. I don't have a ton of insight on that front, but I was going to add that I think that as newsrooms have become more collaborative with each other, it has been a real benefit for students. I just think that newsrooms are more used to collaborating in that way, that it doesn't feel as walled off for a student to collaborate with them as well. That felt a lot different from my time as an undergraduate student to a grad student in this program. It just felt a lot more accessible to work with an organization, rather than being somebody who is outside and trying to pitch and never hearing back. It feels like it does open a lot of opportunities, hopefully, to students that can be mutually beneficial.
Yeah, makes sense. And even with Hugo's working with Illinois Latino News, but also the Chicago Reporter, even within this collaboration with Apps and another student that he's working with. And then I know you have done a ton of collaborations in general.
Yeah, we're collaborating with WBEZ on community conversations, and we're drawing from each other, right? WBEZ is drawing from my experience in working with the Hispanic Latino community. I'm working with them on just the resources that they have, from collecting data to also using their platform and their brand and reaching the largest audience. And so collaboration for when I think about Apps, it's about, I want to expose her to as many media outlets as possible, right? Not just Illinois Latino News or the Chicago Reporter, which I'm an associate editor there, but both newsrooms are part of Solving for Chicago, which is 20 plus newsrooms. And both newsrooms are part of the Chicago Independent Media Alliance. And so that's very important for her to get that exposure and develop, hopefully, relationships, especially as she's thinking about what happens next. But it's also good for the public, right? At the core, my job is to tell stories and reach the widest audience. And I know I could do better if I collaborate with others, especially for an outlet that's new to the Chicago area to Illinois. From a business perspective, it's a whole different story, right? Of course, there's some competition that happens in the back office, but I'm telling you, that is an antiquated way of thinking, and that is what's dooming legacy media across the board. Collaboration is the foundation, not just from a storytelling perspective and doing good for the community, but it's also a business proposition for long-term systemic growth.
Amen.
All right. In the back and then there. Oh, you, sorry, you're not in the back, but yeah.
Thank you. Maybe to Hugo, but anybody, what are you seeing as far as engagement by audiences, whether it's readership or clicks or something else, for about solutions journalism specifically? Is it more or less too early to tell?
I think it's a work in progress. I think part of it is to understand it's a marathon, not a sprint, but we're starting on the right foot. We are creating surveys, short surveys, and really being transparent about what we're doing. We're telling the audience, we want to hear from you. So for example, with Solving for Chicago, which actually the data was great. I think we got in excess of maybe 500 respondents. It was very focused, right? It was about essential workers and the path forward. And what we learned was by leveraging the 20 plus newsrooms, we really got a great response and a focused response, so that then we collectively looked at the data and said, okay, we want to tell stories about essential workers and the path forward as we continue to move away from the pandemic. But what stories should we do? The audience, the public are helping us define what that story should be and that focus. So I think different degrees, as part of a large coalition of 20 newsrooms, absolutely. Individually, I still need some help, but different degrees of progress, but that's the path. And then you use that when you're packaging content, you're telling the audience, this story is produced in collaboration with this larger group, and it's based on data that we collected from you. And here's the data, and this is what we're doing. So being transparent every step on the way really builds trust, as opposed to what too often happens is like, how does this story came about? We're demystifying the process, and that's key to success.
How do you each, Allison Burns from the University of Maryland College Park. How do you each define success in your collaborative projects?
Ooh. Let me give a really quick answer, but I'd love to hear from them. I think one, it's awesome if you have a great published piece that you're really proud of, and it ideally makes some impact and gets a lot of attention. But even more importantly, especially from the student side, I think is the experience. Like the hate crimes piece actually hasn't been published yet, and hopefully it'll be revived at some point, but I feel like it was such a success because we learned so much and got other story ideas, and the students got an amazing investigative education from that project. So, but I'd love to hear what you all think.
I mean, I ditto. Completion is really always. So yeah, that's the first thing to focus on, but definitely giving people experiences that they haven't had yet. I think, especially when I've been interning and learning journalism, every outlet, I kind of learned something different or another skill that I can take and make me a better journalist eventually. I think with the hate crimes project, we went downtown to the clerk's office and looked up some stuff. We filed first FOIAs. We got FOIAs back and we looked at it. So like giving those kind of experiences where I can take this journalism and bring it somewhere else, and I can do a bigger project that I wasn't able to do before. So just kind of those take-home skills.
The project that we did was, like I had mentioned, was so focused on talking to community members, and Southside Weekly is really focused on their print product. And so I think success for us in this project was building those relationships and talking with people, and then getting the print product in their hands and going and delivering that because that is really the focus and distribution of Southside Weekly. And it meant a lot to the people that we talked to and those community members. So that felt like a real success.
I think like going into the project, I was like, okay, I want like experience, and also like a publication of a piece would be really nice. But I think now talking to the students and the professors and the experts on this piece, I think for me, success would be when the piece comes out, they feel like their stories and their testimonies are kind of honored and that it does justice to their experience. That would be success for me.
On a personal note, it's really gratifying to listen to apps and other students, right? She's talked about a lot of aha moments, and I'm like, yes, this is great. This is exactly as a journalist and as a mentor what I want to see, because I've experienced that. I've been in apps' shoes years ago, but I've been in those shoes, and I'm the result of very selfless people. Certainly, working with Medill, it provides us resources to produce focused stories that without that assistance, it would be very difficult for us, especially as a startup. And then absolutely, it's the finished product, right? Which we won't know until later. How does that impact the community? What's going to be the engagement? That goes back to solutions journalism and the 4 pillars about focusing on response, focusing on insights, focusing on evidence, and then the limitations. And so that's the long game. But there are different measures of success that work concurrently. Some are personal and some are very focused on, reaching audiences.
And I think the experience really is so important. I mean, if you end up with a final product that's award-winning and great, but everyone hates each other at the end of it and never wants to do that collaboration again, that hasn't happened with us. But if that did happen, I wouldn't necessarily consider that a success, but just all the relationships and learning and just great experiences that have come out of all these collaborations, along with the great products, I think it has been an awesome success. So I don't know, are we out of time or can we take one more question?
Yeah. 4 minutes.
Okay, oh, great, okay. Yeah, thank you, Olivia.
I just wanted to add on to, because I think you guys are being modest about how well y'all did for the hate crimes piece, but also I think one of the things that was voiced during that time was the students felt that they were worthy to be part of the group, and they definitely showcased that, and the building of their confidence throughout that entire time was really great to see. I know Hugo talks about self-worth, but if you don't have a final product, being able to say that I was able to provide peer review or an edit or whatever as a student, that really boosts your confidence and also allows you to somewhat think of, your resume differently too, and what types of skill sets you put in there. So I think I really appreciated Josh being able to provide that space for the students to allow for them to show their skill sets from Northwestern and Medill, what they were taught. That gave me, who was helping project manage, even insights to how we could better, our processes around the Airtable FOIA tracker, things of that nature. So your students were very great with us.
And that's valuable currency, right? Because for us, it's also very important to provide students real work experience. Students are often stereotyped for having a lack of experience, but guess what, media, you have to give them the opportunities to get the experience. So for us to work with students and helping them work on their portfolio or add to their portfolio, so that when they are vying for those jobs, and they can show that they've been their work has been published in known media, the Chicago Reporter celebrating 50 years, and all the way to a startup like Illinois Latino News. That's very important and very powerful.
Yeah, and that organization with this particular project, the hate crimes I talked about, Olivia was a huge part of that too. So I wanted to give her a shout out for that and the way she helped the students learn. Yeah, I mean, just to build on what you were saying about the confidence, to see the students file FOIAs and get denied or ignored or insulted by FOIA officers, and then to strategize with Josh and watch them figuring out how to respond, and then see them go back with more confidence and knowing what to ask. And then some of these same students, later on in their jobs, when they were no longer students, seeing them just being FOIA masters and knowing exactly how to navigate that process, that is just so cool. And you couldn't hardly get a better.
Yeah, and they've been on panels, they've been talking, and that's I know for Josh, that's just a proud dad moment there.
Oh yeah.
Being able to say that, they're able to push back and whatnot, and not just for FOIA, but also just for what they deserve, even just coming out of college and trying to get a job. Students are very, very valuable because they put that investment into their education. So in real time, they're really giving you more than you actually asked for when you ask them to intern. So again, kudos around the self-worth, comments. That's very true, and just the mutual respect, because that takes it way further than just the collaboration alone.
Awesome. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.